Welcome to Tabletop Tactics. My name's Lawrence, and recently I had the incredible honour of interviewing Sir Ian Livingstone, one of the original co-founders of Games Workshop. In the upcoming interview, we discuss the history of Games Workshop as well as the beginnings of Warhammer itself. We then further discuss his incredible success with the Fighting Fantasy series of adventure game books before he went on to work in the video games industry with more incredible hits such as titles like Tomb Raider. He has left an indelible mark on the UK gaming industry, and his effect has literally been worldwide. If you're interested in learning more about the history of how this all began, stay tuned and enjoy the show. So Ian, thank you for joining us here in the studio. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. We've been very excited about you joining us, and we're really excited to talk about your latest works, Magic Realms and Dice Men, and the latest Fighting Fantasy book as well.
Oh yes.
But before we get into all of that, we hoped that you'd perhaps like to talk about the beginnings of Games Workshop, because so many of our audience members will know you from co-founding Games Workshop.
Yeah.
Pre-Fighting Fantasy.
Yeah, so I mean, in January 2025, it'll be the 50th anniversary since we started Workshop, and it all came about with a love of board games. I was at school with two guys, Steve Jackson and John Peake, and after school we went our separate ways and ended up in London at different times, and were sharing a flat in Shepherd's Bush, and we had pretty boring, badly paid jobs, and thought we've stayed in a lot and played board games just as a way of entertainment. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if we somehow form a kind of business some sort without knowing what it was, based around games. And John was a civil engineer, but he was also a great craftsman, and he'd been making backgammon boards following a holiday in Greece, which he was selling to his colleagues at work. And so I started saying, well, I could sell them to shops maybe. So I did that, and Steve did the admin. But our hearts weren't really in that. And so we decided to publish a fanzine called Owl and Weasel. It was a 10p, 4-page, pretty unintelligible piece of just ramblings about the game that we played. And we sent it out to everybody we knew. And 50 of those, we got their addresses through Albion, which was a Play-by-Mail magazine at the time.
Okay.
That had just been closed down, been run by Don Termal. I used to do the covers for it.
Okay.
And on the mailing list was Brian Bloom, who we didn't know. Anyway, everybody got a copy. And then we were contacted by this gentleman with a strange name called Gary Gygax.
Oh, who's that?
And he wrote to us and said, love your magazine. Here's this new game I've just invented. What do you think? And that game was Dungeons & Dragons, and had a very plain white box with a very average illustration on the front. But when you open up the box, it opened up your imagination like no game had ever done before. I don't think any game ever will again. The first role-playing game, Heroes and Wizards, role-playing, exploring the Dungeon Master's dungeon, theatre on the fly, incredibly obsessed by D&D. So Steve became absolutely immersed in it, as I did, but John wasn't. He preferred the traditional games. Anyway, we all agreed we should somehow start to import this game. Thought it was going to be a milestone in games history. So we ordered 6 copies, because that's all the money we had in the world. On the back of that huge order, we got the exclusive distribution agreement for 3 years for the whole of Europe, because what we didn't know is that Gygax was also living out of a flat in Lake Geneva. So we suddenly become the British distributors for D&D, so we started selling it through Owl and Weasel, and we called the company Games Workshop because John's bedroom was like a workshop with wood shavings and sawdust all over the place. And we used to see people milling around on the street outside on a Saturday when we weren't working at our real jobs, and we used to open the window, looking for Games Workshop, mate, up here. So they'd come up and rummage around our pigsty of a bedroom, and finding the odd box of D&D, and went away very happy. Of course, there was no internet then, there was no mobile phones, we didn't even have a phone in our flat. And when there's a public payphone on the ground floor which we shared with our landlord, and when it would ring we always knew it was going to be a telephone order for D&D. We'd race down the stairs, always too late. I was there first. You want Games Workshop, do you? You can go to hell. Just hang up on everybody.
Yeah.
But that kind of just created more kind of mystique around it, and people more determined. Anyway, the year passed by, 1975, and at the end of which we decided, Steve and I, to go full time, and John still wasn't into it, so he decided to leave Workshop. So then there were two of us, and we went to the States in August '76, and took 3 months doing it, going across the States, delivering cars, do the whole Route 666 thing, and finally got to Gen Con 9 in Lake Geneva, met Guy Gaxon, all the new games companies that were being set up, and said, we're the official distributors of Dungeons and Dragons, you know, and...
you could go to hell.
we want to be your distributor too. So we signed up all these distribution agreements and went back to the UK, had no money, nowhere to live, because we'd given up our flat with John, and had parcels arriving at my old girlfriend's place because we had nowhere to post them to, and we hadn't, last but not least, nowhere to operate out of. So we decided to go to the bank manager and get a loan. Seemed quite an obvious thing to do. So you go in there and say, hello, Mr. Bank Manager, we've got this great game. It's called Dungeons and Dragons. It's a role-playing game. You go on these fantastic journeys of mine, killing monsters, finding treasure, and it goes on, you know, for weeks on weeks and weeks. And he looked like at us a bit like a dog watching television. Had this sort of strange expression on his face. I had no idea what we were talking about, and asked us to leave. And we were kind of very, very annoyed at that. But I guess in hindsight, you realise we were hardly investor ready. You know, we had nothing to justify a business model and no cash flows.
Just a lot of enthusiasm.
Just passion and enthusiasm. Anyway, the result of that, of course, is that we had to live in a van for 3 months, which we parked outside this estate agent, because we managed to rent a small room at the back of the estate agent. We also joined the local squash club, so we could have a shave, a shower, etc. in the morning. So we had this very small triangular life, out of the van, into the office till midnight, back into the stinky old van, and then the squash court in the morning. Got really good at squash, by the way.
Yeah.
as a default. So that was really the birth of Workshop. It was very hand to mouth, very amateurish. Two young fanboys going for it and not knowing what we're really doing, making it up as we went along, but we were living the dream.
Yeah, it's an incredible start to something which obviously became gargantuan in size, isn't it?
Well, it's a testament to being adventurous and being brave and trying to make something of your passion. It's wonderful.
And then do you remember how were you even fulfilling orders when you went on that 3-month hiatus to the States? Did you just pause orders?
Didn't do anything.
So you weren't selling anything at that point?
So we had redirected letters to my girlfriend's house, so she had a big pile of orders when we came back, and then just get on with it. And it was interesting. So, and we realised we had to up our game a little bit, no pun intended. So we ended up stopping Owl and Weasel at the beginning of 1977, and started White Dwarf magazine because we'd seen that TSR, which is Guy Gax's company, had the Dragon magazine, and they were making being more professional than we were at that time, because we was very hands to mouth at our young business. And then White Dwarf took off amazingly. We reprinted. I mean, we kind of bet the farm on that, because we printed 200 copies of Owl and Weasel at its heyday, and then suddenly we had to print 4,000 copies of White Dwarf 1, but we reprinted twice. So that was a great vindication. And so demand was picking up, but I used to try and sell D&D and stuff to other retail outlets, but they were not interested at all, because, well, some were who knew about it, but most couldn't get their head around that you need supplements and miniatures and extra dice and all this stuff. They wouldn't, and it wasn't even a complete game. So
in its original form, what was it that people were buying?
Well, it's more like a designer game kit than anything else. 3 largely unintelligible rule books and a set of dice if you were lucky. And for everything else, you had to kind of do for yourself. It was very much a do-it-yourself game at that time. But I mean, it was theatre on the fly. It was nothing really was hardwired as a game system then. So it was just the fun of that collaborative enjoyment of this, say, spontaneous theatre. Anyway, so we started White Dwarf, and in '78 we really went for it. We started. Not only did we start Citadel Miniatures, we also opened our first retail store, mainly because the resistance for other people stocking our games. So we thought we'd need a flagship store. So it was in a sort of very small side street in Hammersmith in West London. And we were amazed on April '78, there's a huge line of people outside waiting for it to open, and suddenly felt, I think we're on the right track here.
Yeah, because you had effectively built a customer base through, well, first Owl and Weasel and then White Dwarf.
Yeah.
I mean, reprinting 4,000, and you did that twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'd built a substantial customer base at that point.
Well, substantial for the time.
Yeah, for
relative
the time,
to today's audiences,
of course.
Pretty small. But so we made loads of mistakes, but it didn't matter because nobody else was doing it.
Right.
So and we had huge support from the community. I mean, I think one thing about the games community is an incredible community. There's a lot of help and collaboration and cooperation. You know, it's a fantastic community.
Yeah, well, we've definitely experienced the same, haven't we? Yeah. Okay, really interesting. So you said that you basically took about 3 years after you came back to then open that first retail store, and Citadel Miniatures, at some point you'd met Brian Ansell, who was running Citadel Miniatures, but that was up in Nottingham?
That's right, because he was the founder of Asgard Miniatures.
Right.
And we used to order, we were importing miniatures from the States, Ralph Partha and Archive, but it took forever to get here and very expensive to import at the time because there was economic stagnation in Britain, high import duties and all that malarkey. And so we were ordering from Asgard, and he called us up and said, "How come you're ordering so many giant rats from me?" So and the reason is because our players are playing Dungeons and Dragons predominantly, and we need lots of single miniatures of monsters. So he came down to see us, said, "I can be your miniature solution."
Interesting.
So we formed a company between us with Workshop and Brian to create Citadel Miniatures. And that was the start of an amazing journey.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. So when Brian was running Asgard Miniatures, what was his core audience then? Because obviously these miniatures were being produced, but they didn't have any rules to go with per se, did they?
He had some military miniatures and some fancy miniatures, but they were just for kind of generic, I think, for all systems,
Got it, okay. And so then, that was the perfect partnership.
Yeah.
And then you were, from the get-go through Games Workshop, you had the idea that you would sell the miniatures that would obviously go with these role-playing games like D&D. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So then you're into 19. So we opened our first shop in '78, opened Citadel in '78.
Yeah.
In '79, our 3-year distribution agreement had run out by then.
Right.
And so that faced us with a huge problem or decision point in our lives, a big crossroads moment, because Gary Gygax contacted us and said, "This has been fantastic so far. I want to merge my company, TSR, with Games Workshop.
Oh, wow.
How about it, folks?"
It's a huge offer.
And we thought about it and thought, we're kind of young, independent-minded Brits in the 70s. We were then, not so much now. Ancient now, but... and we didn't want to spend half our life commuting to Wisconsin either. Because we had our lives were here, and I think people in those days were less mobile, so it's quite an effort to get there. So we said no.
Wow.
And gulp.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, if you say no, not only going to lose exclusivity, we're going to have to set up here ourselves.
Right.
But we weren't that worried at that point, because not only did we have TSR, we had all these other companies that we were exclusive distributors for. So we had Chaosium with RuneQuest and Games Designers Workshop with Traveller, all the supplements like from Judges Guild, and a whole host of other games company stuff. So we were effectively a one-stop shop for any independent wanting role-playing merchandise and games content. So they did set up, but people still ordered through us, so it was just like another part of the delivery supply chain. So it'd be delivered from TSR to TSUK, who then probably sent 90% of their stuff to us.
Yeah.
So yes, we were now vulnerable, and then that's one thing I've always remember through all my business careers that you must, at all costs, if you can, own your own intellectual property, because you're not beholden to anybody else then. So we set about trying to make some board games, some which did pretty well, like Apocalypse and Talisman, and others. I did Battle Cars myself, and also the Judge Dredd board game. Meanwhile, Brian was also scratching his head what we could do from the Citadel side. And he always wanted a system that would sell more than just the occasional giant rat. He wanted to sell regiments rather than just single figures that you play in D&D. So he got his head round a system that would just do that, to try and promote the sales of regiments. And he came up with the Warhammer idea. And originally it was going to be a few pages of rules that were given away free with mail orders to get people to just start playing and buying more miniatures. But it kind of gathered momentum, so he brought in Rick Priestley and Richard Halliwell to flesh it out. Right. And then we collectively decided, well, this really should be a box product. So Warhammer Fantasy Battle came out in 1983, and it sold out really quickly. I think we only printed 3,000 units of it. So he did the next iteration with better production values, because one thing about Brian, he always wanted something showed it had support. He would then invest more money to kind of raise the production values and make it, give it even longer life. And that sold out pretty quickly. And then, of course, there was role play, and ultimately when 40K came out in '87, written largely by Rick Priestley, it was suddenly became a thing, and then suddenly the whole value of Workshop was underpinned by its own IP, which is Warhammer. So kind of back on safe ground, determining our own destiny, being rather beholden on a third party to let you sell their products.
Yeah, and at this point, Games Workshop was still distributing other IPs, other games, still doing D&D. Yeah. And when had you started, I know we're going to get on to Fighting Fantasy, which I can't wait to talk about.
Well, you can read Dice Man and read all about it.
Exactly. But at this point, you were still distributing other games, whilst also creating your own, and then Warhammer was just gaining momentum over that time. Okay, that's really interesting. So at what point did you realise that Warhammer, or did you realise that Warhammer was probably going to just take over everything that Games Workshop was doing?
Well, as a company, we were very happy that suddenly there's been a huge boom in the number of miniatures that are being sold. So there's more focus was going on to Citadel, because Brian was always whinging that because we had restricted working capital, because we still didn't have any bank finance. Right. So we wanted, wearing our workshop hats, more shops, more board games, more White Dwarf material. And he was more interested in having more investment in Citadel for more ranges, more miniatures-based material. So it was all this kind of fight, as it were. Yeah. But along comes Penguin Books to determine really how that would go, because we used to run Games Days, and Games Day 79, we're now going back in time a bit, at Games Day, this editor from Penguin Books, Geraldine Cook, came along, and she was bemused by the enthusiasm, passion, and almost obsessiveness of which people were playing D&D and other role-playing games, and said to Steve Jackson and myself, would you write a book about this hobby? And we said rather glibly, without thinking about it, well, rather than that, how about we write a book that allows you to experience that hobby? She said, oh, that sounds great. Send in a synopsis. And I thought, oh, no, well.
So of course you didn't have the actual solid.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So we sent in a synopsis, which we called The Magic Quest, which was an interactive book. So we took the essence of a role-playing game and replaced the Dungeon Master with multiple choice format of the book itself, and decided to create a branching narrative, but modified by a simplified game system. So taking 3 characteristics: skill, stamina, and luck. And that was really the birth of Fighting Fantasy, or was it called Magic Quest then? And we submitted that, and she thought this was amazing. So she went along to the Penguin managing director in their monthly management meeting and said, I've got this synopsis for this interactive book, and apparently they all laughed so hard, some even hit their head on the table, said, an interactive book got no chance of selling. People only like linear narrative. What are you talking about? But she fought our corner. She was brilliant, Geraldine, but absolutely got nowhere with Penguin. So she went to the Puffin imprint editor. They said, that sounds quite interesting, let's do it. So it took over a year and a half, and so she said, we've got the green light, go for it. So we fleshed out the synopsis and retitled the book, The Warlock of Firetop Mountain. The first Fighting Fantasy game book came out in August 1982. Without any fanfare.
Yeah.
The reps didn't know what it was from Penguin Books. They, what's this nonsense? If you read it sequentially, it makes no sense whatsoever. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so we talked about it in White Dwarf magazine and a few shops. We were also near our Downing Road shop was Latimer Upper School, and they kind of heard about it and started talking about it. And the virality of the day was playgrounds, of course, the chat on the playgrounds. And so schools kind of got taken over by Fighting Fantasy, and they'd sell out the local Smiths, and that was spread to another school. And so this whole network of schools connected. And Penguin still didn't understand it. They reprinted, I think, 11 times in the first month and a half, small print runs.
Right.
Until, I think it was like November that 82, Geraldine came and said, we want two more. So Steve wrote Citadel of Chaos and I wrote Forest of Doom with its famous Ian McCaig cover. And they started selling in crazy numbers. So getting back to Brian and what was going on with Warhammer, that we were running Games Workshop during the day and now going back to our respective homes and writing Fighting Fantasy game books like 2 a.m.
I was just thinking, there's a lot to spin.
And it was just becoming exhausting.
Yeah.
Not to mention really annoying our girlfriends at the time. What do you mean we're not going out again? And so something had to give. So we ended up appointing Brian Ansell as managing director, and then he effectively got the green light to put more resource onto Citadel.
Right.
And so that's how Citadel eventually got the upper hand in this equation. Till when you get to 1986, we moved the whole of the HQ to Nottingham.
Yeah.
And so Workshop became effectively not part of it. It's still Games Workshop was the holding company, but operationally, the Workshop component was now managed by Citadel.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how it went.
Yeah. And so at this point, the demand for Fighting Fantasy is probably starting to dwarf your time entirely. I mean, you're 3 or 4 or 5
taking up more and more time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so
we would on less day to day with Workshop.
Yeah.
Because Penguin were wanted now from not giving a shit basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fighting Fantasy, thinking it's the best thing they've ever had, and sending us on world tours of Australia and New Zealand and Canada and the States and all over Europe and stuff. So in Japan, you go to Japan and where they'd done incredible numbers, we're getting besieged by fans, thousands of gifts left, and doing these endless signing tours. And I remember doing 87 interviews in Australia in 3 days on network TV. And
oh my goodness.
yeah, it was insane.
Yeah.
It was a phenomenon, but people, because there was no internet, people didn't talk about it as they would for phenomenon today.
Yeah.
In fact, the only media coverage was usually negative.
Okay.
Like, because they're interactive books and you're coming across undead monsters like ghouls and demons, the Evangelical Alliance published an 8-page warning guide saying, because you're interacting with these ghouls and demons, you're just bound to get possessed by the devil. A woman, a housewife in deepest suburbia, phoned in her local radio station and said, having read one of my books, her son levitated.
What?
So the kids were thinking, what, for £1.50 I can fly?
That's going to bring more sales, surely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
The local vicar at Penguin Books threatened to chain himself to the railings until they were banned. There were magazines articles written about them saying the dangers of children using their imaginations too much. God forbid kids use their imagination. There were petitions sent in, and I still have the addresses because they sent me copies of the petitions from parents saying that their children are now obsessed with Fighting Fantasy and it has to stop, you have to ban them.
Mm.
At the same time, teachers in certain schools are beginning to say, hey, these are great. They're great for reluctant readers, short attention span. Readers are loving these. They're good for improving literacy. They were proven to improve literacy by nearly 20%. They're obviously great for reluctant readers. They were great for critical thinking. They encourage people to write and to draw. And through agency, through that empowerment of choice with Fighting Fantasy Game Book, you are the hero, you make all the choices. This is all about your story. It's not a passive experience. That agency and empowerment is very important to people who might be having a tough time or just want to be part of something where they take control. So the teaching establishment started saying, hey folks, these are great, why are you criticizing them? Yet because it had the word game, Fighting Fantasy Game Book, people all seem to connect game with something frivolous at best and probably harmful.
Right.
But they've been said now they're kind of a contextual hub for learning, the way you kind of using loads of different parts of your brain to get your way through a Fighting Fantasy Game Book. While having a great time being entertained in worlds of monsters and magic. Of course, my job was trying to lure people to their doom.
Which
promise
you did
them
many times.
great rewards and gold, only for them to fall onto poison spikes or get fired by a dragon.
I had several experiences trying to take these out at my library when I was a kid. A very reluctant librarian just wasn't wanting to let me take them out because she thought they were going to rot my brain, possess me. I had to call my mother.
And look at you now.
Really?
Here I am.
Are you okay, Joe?
I'm fine. Yes, full of vitality and stamina.
It's really interesting, actually, because I remember Fighting Fantasy was my first exposure to, I would say, avidly reading and, just couldn't put it down, wanted the next one. And then I graduated into, bigger fantasy books. Lord of the Rings came next, Hobbit, all of that sort of jazz. But it did absolutely everything that you said. It got me engaged. It got me interested in reading. I felt like, as you're right, it's not a passive experience. I was interacting with this. It was the ultimate escapism, and there was just nothing like it at the time. But the whole, how close was the Satanic Panic stuff going on with D&D at the same time?
Same.
So
we were tarred with the same brush.
Right, got it. Okay, so that must have been tough. Puffin would have had to have stuck to their guns to continue publishing it, right?
the MD, Liz Attenborough of Puffin, did a fantastic job defending us, because she became a great believer in the power of play, effectively, and learning that the readers got through playing and reading at the same time. And well done her.
Yeah, brilliant. Puffin really came through in the end.
They did.
Yeah. And then
a slow start.
Yes, because I remember you saying it was about a year for them to actually get it off the ground. Yeah. And then there was resistance on the artwork as well initially.
Yeah, but again, well done Puffin for letting us get our own way, because it's a children's imprint, they wanted safe covers, so a little gnome on a toadstool and a little happy frog nearby and butterflies. And we wanted covers that threatened to rip the faces off the readers. So we managed to convince them to use some of the people we'd used at Games Workshop. And some of my favourite artists I work with, and it's amazing to have done that, because like Forest of Doom, the original one, was painted by Ian McCaig, who they also did City of Thieves, Death Trap Dungeon Island, did Lizard King. If you look at the Puffin edition of City of Thieves, you'll see the main bad guy, Zambar Bone, with his skull and spiked cranium, who has a remarkable resemblance to Darth Maul, because Ian went on to work for Lucas and created Darth Maul. Yeah, so they are distant cousins. Yeah. So some of the best artists in the UK we work with on Workshop and Fighting Fantasy, and of course, they never get the credit they deserve, and that's one of the main reasons why I decided to publish Magic Realms. It's kind of 40 years of some of the best artists I've ever worked with, and celebrating their work and them as incredible artists and human beings. But yeah, and I think absolutely. I remember seeing, because it was actually Forest of Doom was the first one that I ever did, and I remember seeing it in my primary school library on the shelf, and I was like, what is that? Because of course it didn't look like any of the other books as well, and the art was critical. It was critical to get me to pick it up. You felt as though you were there, and that was always been what we wanted. That we wanted a sort of moment in time where whoever the adversary in the cover is was kind of threatening you, is about to do something awful to you.
Yeah.
And that you felt you were there and you wanted to react. And so it's this you versus the book thing we wanted to create.
Yeah.
And I'm delighted now Scholastica have let us do our own thing again with the artists. So we've, for the new book that's just come out, Dungeon of Blood Island, we used Ian McCaig for the cover.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ian,
cover.
you are the best.
Yeah.
And an incredible artist from Hungary called Christian Balla for the internal illustration. So I think we're back to our roots in the visual aesthetic.
Yeah, that's
And
very
hopefully
exciting.
the goriness of the stories.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Okay, so at some point during this saga of doing all of the press tours, of continuing to write fighting fantasy books, you decided enough was enough, and you decided that you would sell your shares in Games Workshop, which was ultimately to Brian himself?
No, we'd sold some to him.
Okay.
But when the big moment came, when Steve, myself, Brian, and the financial director, who were the shareholders of Workshops, all sold out, and that was in 1991, to a management buyout led by Tom Kirby, who then floated the company 2 years later on the London Stock Exchange, and seen a little bit of increase in value since then.
Yeah, a couple of pounds. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Amazing. So then, when you left, effectively any sort of management duties at Games Workshop, did you then continue to write fighting fantasy for the next few years?
Well, Workshop, we started out in 91.
Yeah.
Carried on writing. Penguin, didn't think they'd last that long, but they did.
Yeah.
Until finally they'd had enough in 1995, because they'd put out 59 books. That was a lot. Now you get into a kind of oversupply of content. So they called it a halt then, and I'd already invested some of the money I got from Workshop into a video games developer, publisher called Domark. And because I kind of still miss that sort of operational side as well as creative side. I've always been, I guess I see myself as an entrepreneur, but really focused on content.
Right.
I'm more at home, either creating myself or working with creatives than I am working with, must have been the nightmares there from a bank manager back in the 70s.
Yeah.
But I still enjoy the business side. So I went on the board of Domark, realised it was a terrible time to be an small independent. The 16-bit market had just fallen off the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
So we had an opportunity to put 4 companies together to create Newco IDOS, which we floated in 95, and in 96 we acquired the only other public company in the space, Centre Gold, and with that came Core Design in Derby, and with Core Design came Lara Croft Tomb Raider. So I saw Lara before she was launched, was part of the due diligence process. And sounds a bit corny, I guess. Love at first sight, I guess, because
it was for me too.
not only not just a fantastic games character, and the very first one with a female character, but it was one of the very first games with a 3D character moving into 3D world, because most of the games at that time were side-scrolling.
That's right.
2D games. So it had a fantastic character, fantastic game engine. The graphics were incredible for the time, and the PlayStation was just about to launch. So because all the stars were aligned, so we bought Centre Gold.
So that was pre-PlayStation? In terms of setting up the idea for Tomb Raider, that was before?
Well, it was designed with PlayStation and the 32-bit consoles in mind, but it was also on PC as well.
Of course, yeah.
But it actually first came out on Sega Saturn.
Oh, did it come out on the Saturn
Yeah,
first?
but then PlayStation made one of those offers you can't say no to get exclusivity on it.
Yes, yeah.
So, so we launched Tomb Raider in October '96, and had no idea what was going to follow with that. But I think we had 100,000 units in the budget and sold 7 million copies over time. And then all the, the merchandising and licensing of all and films. Got to meet Angelina Jolie a couple of times on the set.
Oh, really?
We licensed the movies to Paramount.
Yeah.
And so I had a great journey in video games, and ultimately we were bought by Square Enix of Japan, and I don't think I had that kind of Japanese corporate mentality, so I left IDOS in the 2000s, and then became a kind of independent angel investor, but carried on writing books all the way through this, because Fighting Fantasy is my passion project. I love the people who who in the Fighting Fantasy world love all the people who love the books, and it's great to meet them. We just had Fighting Fantasy Fest a couple of weekends ago, and Ian McKay came over from Canada to be at it. He and I did a double act. It was great fun, and it's part of my life. I'll never stop.
Yeah.
Much to my wife's annoyance.
No, it's great. Please don't stop.
Yeah.
Well, can we talk about your latest Fighting Fantasy book then?
Yes, of course we can.
Because it's a sequel to...
It's a sequel and a prequel, yes. Yeah. Well, anyone who's read Death Trap Dungeon, which was the best-selling book in 1984, you'll know what's involved. It's the ultimate dungeon crawl. You're competing with 5 others to get through to win this purse of 20,000 gold pieces, and only one person can get through it. And in Death Trap, without being much of a spoiler, you have to actually take on some of the competitors that you meet as NPCs in the book.
Oh, nice.
So you're trying to navigate your way through the book, making the right choices, overcoming the monsters with dice rolls, and ultimately win through. So that was designed in the narrative by Baron Sukhumvit of Fang, who had a brother called Lord Karnas, who lived on Blood Island. And his dear brother, they hated each other, and he was deeply jealous of Death Trap Dungeon. So in the dungeon on Blood Island, as the name would suggest, he decides to create his own dungeon, bigger, better, super dungeon, the ultimate dungeon on Blood Island, and asks everybody to come along. And he stages it like a week before the sequel, Trial of Champions, to try and deflect from his brother's next dungeon adventure. So you are now one of a lot of people, 120 contestants who have to face off in the arena of death to even qualify to go into the dungeon. And there's loads of characters that you meet and start friendships of. I've got this kind of reputation for creating characters and kind of joyfully watch them die, much to the pain of the readers. Or even worse, in Death Trap, where you actually have to kill one of them in a fight. So look out for some tear-jerking moments in the dungeon in Blood Island. But I'm really pleased with it. People said it was pretty good, and I've got 2 playtesters who kind of give me the thumbs up or the middle thumb or the thumbs down. They've both given me thumbs up, so
that's excited. Brilliant. I really look forward to playing it, actually.
Yeah, me too. That sounds really exciting.
Kindly been sent copies, so we're going to get on.
Good old Scholastic, bribing you with free books.
They are, yeah. So, may I ask about the process of writing the Fighting Fantasy books? Now that you've just written one so recently, has the process changed at all?
No, the only difference is that, I used to write them longhand with a fountain pen, and my girlfriend in the 70s, in the 80s, would type them up, and then make a few editorial changes, and then I'd take them into Penguin Books and then do all the typesetting and that long-winded way they used to do things. And of course, now I use a Mac to input the storyline. Obviously, it's a lot easier to edit myself and change things around. But other than that, everything's remained the same. I still create a physical flowchart. So I have a sheet of paper with 400 numbers on it.
Right.
And I start at number 1. And I say, okay, cross 2 numbers off that. So number 1's going to go to 27 and 182.
Right.
And then I make little notations of what happens when you get there.
Right.
And this thing just kind of spreads out.
Yeah.
Gets longer and longer. But it can go out exponentially as you bring it back together again now and then. So there's several points where you bring the story back together and for important information that readers must have. But other than that, there's a lot of to and froing because you're more writing several stories at once, several pathways at once. So you've got to make sure that there is a one true pathway through. There's no kind of cul-de-sacs. And obviously when you get to a point further on in the story, you think, oh, I need a locked door here. Now, of course, the locked door, I need a key. So you have to go back and put the key somewhere where hopefully no one will find it. Yeah. But it is there. Yeah. And try and steer people away from that. So there's a lot of adaptation as you go along, but you've got an overall story arc which you stick to. Yeah. And then you've got to then test it for, so there's not too much gold, or not enough gold, so you can't complete it. Then you've got to test it for difficulty, kind of assuming average dice rolls. And then you've got to make sure that the compelling story arc will really want to draw people through. It's not just kind of random events tied together. Yeah. So it's important that every choice has a consequence of meaning and value. And I go through all of this and spend hours and hours and hours and hours checking it, and I think, why am I doing this? I'm only going to cheat. You cheated, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
You cheated, didn't you? You're either cheaters or liars.
No, when I was a young child, I first picked it up when I was 6 years old, and I remember entries where you would, if you have the X magic item, I'd be like, I don't have that X magic item, but maybe I do.
It's funny because I used to see people on tubes and buses and things with their hands like this. And I used to call it the five-fingered bookmark.
Work my way back.
I used to chuckle to myself when I see people like that doing that.
You must have had a real kick out of that, seeing people reading.
Yeah,
what
good.
you'd written. Yeah, amazing. So, right, they ask, are you writing any more? Are there any more plans?
Don't, please.
I mean, I have to.
It's such hard work writing these things.
Yeah.
And I hand it in, and it's such great sense of relief and say never again.
Yeah.
And then about a few weeks later, I've got an idea.
Yeah.
And then it just starts gnawing in your ear, and they start making a few notes, and the whole process starts again.
That's good.
How was it going from, so one of my, I'll call it a core memory, why not? Legend of Zagor. Because part of that, there was a board game.
The board game, yeah.
Which I just have this very vivid attachment to as a kid. A couple of times I'd take it to school to try and set up if it was going to be like a rainy break time. I get it all set up, and then it'd be the end of lunch. I have to just put it away again. What was it like going from having the book done to then making it into a board game? Was that relatively?
It was done at the same time. Actually.
Oh, was it?
Oh,
right.
About,
Okay.
yeah. But it wasn't. It's got that voice box in the game. It was not supposed to have that. That was Parker Brothers wanting a unique selling point to put in the box. Okay. I wasn't that keen on that idea. I just wanted a great board game where you explore.
I remember the
dungeon.
islands, so brilliant.
Yeah, but the miniatures in that were pretty good.
Yeah,
I must say they went to a lot of trouble to get a good set of miniatures, and hopefully it was still compelling gameplay despite the voice box of Zagor. You have fallen down a pit.
the thunder comes.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit naff, but it was of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're right. Games like that don't really come out anymore. I suppose the video game market is just so completely taken over, that sort of interaction.
They are quite compelling, these old video games.
Yeah.
But speaking, do you still play games now?
Yes, video games, but more board games than video games. I've got 1,500 board games at home. And we've been playing the same Games Night Club group since the 80s. So Steve Jackson's in it, Peter Molyneux, video game developer, and a couple of friends who are not in the industry. And we play board games, and after every game we have a points allocation to the winners. At the end and I do a newsletter after, basically just to, just tear them apart for how useless they are. And at the end of the year, we tally up the points, and the winner gets the Pagoda Cup for a year. Our names are engraved on it. So it's like a spoof gentleman's club, as it were. But it's just great having like-minded people sitting around a table, talking a load of rubbish and doing deals and stabbing each other in the back.
Yeah.
It makes me very happy to hear that. That's great. That sounds like a lot
That's
of fun.
what gaming's about.
That's what
right?
it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, I think before we finish and wrap up, we should talk a little bit about Magic Realms.
Yes.
And of course, Dicemen itself. Dicemen being the history of Games Workshop, as you co-founded it, and then Magic Realms being all of the artists from Fighting Fantasy that you mentioned before. Magic Realms I've not read yet because I literally got it 2 days ago. Dicemen I've read, I know, it's terrible. Dicemen I read cover to cover over 3 evenings, was obsessed with it. An incredible memoir of that time. And I think just the birth of because even though you were distributing D&D and you weren't the creators of D&D, you were all part of that movement, I feel.
Yeah, we did create some stuff. We did the Fiend Folio, for example.
Right,
That was us. Those were mainly monsters that came out of White Dwarf.
Yeah.
And I've got 15 of my own monsters in the Fiend Folio.
Yeah.
And we did the whole of the production, all the art and everything. But we were kind of effectively written out of the history of that in the preface because it's the same time we said no to the merger.
Right.
So they wanted to downplay our contribution to stuff, unfortunately.
Well, that's a shame. Okay.
We've still got the royalty checks though.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. So what compelled you to finally put together Dicemen and then subsequently Magic Realms?
Well, as I said, some of the best fantasy and science fiction artists in the world reside in the UK.
Yeah.
And we've worked some of the best in the world, from Russ Nicholson, who illustrated the first Warlock Firetop Mountain, and Peter Andrew Jones, who did the cover. But then for me, people like Ian McKay, Carl Kopinski, John Blanche, Martin McKenna, Greg Staples, they're phenomenal. And not enough is made of the artists, so we thought, wouldn't it be great to celebrate them in one volume, and that's Magic Realms. So we're trying to get, it's just kind of all semi-biographical stuff before I'm no longer rolling dice.
Yeah.
So that's why Dice went to get the origin story of Workshop and Magic Realms, to talk about the artists as well as the books, and then the new book itself, Dungeon of Blood Island.
Amazing. And where can we buy these? Amazon? Local retailers?
Some retailers stock them. I think Waterstones and others have got the Dungeon of Blood Island. There are quite a lot of independent bookshops have got the hardbacks. Of course, as always, Amazon and other digital retailers. So hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, we will. And I already do. Well, folks, we hope you absolutely loved listening to Ian sharing his stories. Thank you so much for coming in and for sharing the stories with us.
Keep rolling the dice.
We
I
always
certainly will.
Until next time, we've been Tabletop Tactics. Bye-bye for now.